All right, let's dive into one of the wildest, most profound, and honestly most disturbing dilemmas in all of science fiction. We're unpacking Frank Herbert's masterpiece, Children of Dune, and a story that takes the idea of sacrifice and pushes it to its absolute mind-bending limit. And really, it all comes down to this one single haunting question. What if the only way to guarantee our future as a species was for you to give up your own humanity? And I don't just mean dying for the cause. I mean living for thousands of years as a monster. So, to get our bearings, our story picks up 9 years after the end of Dune Messiah. Paul Mawidib, the Emperor, the Messiah, has walked out into the desert, blind and broken. And he's left behind a crumbling empire and two very, very unusual children. You see, Paul's great victory, his jihad, his ascension, it didn't fix things. His future sight let him steer humanity away from the worst possible outcome, but it was just a temporary fix. Now, under the rule of his sister, Alia, the whole Atreides empire is just rotting. It's stagnant, it's corrupt, and it's become a prisoner of the very religion Paul himself created. And this really gets to the heart of the problem. Paul's grand, heroic plan to save everyone has led to this paralyzed reality. The empire is stuck. And worse, the person in charge, his sister Alia, isn't just a bad ruler. No, she's literally possessed by the mind of her evil grandfather, the Baron Harkonnen. And right in the middle of all this decay are Paul's kids, the 9-year-old twins, Leto II and Ghanima. Now, these are not your average 9-year-olds. They carry the same genetic inheritance, the same curse that has already destroyed their aunt. To really get what's going on with them, you have to understand what it means to be pre-born. Imagine this. You're born, but you already have the complete memories of every single one of your ancestors. It's not like watching a movie. It's thousands of lifetimes, thousands of voices, all screaming inside your head from the moment you take your first breath. It's not a gift, it's a psychological nightmare. And that nightmare leads directly to this terrifying possibility: abomination. That's the technical term for when one of those ancestral personalities, one of those ghosts in your head, is so strong and so evil that it just takes over. It completely consumes and erases the child's own identity. And that is exactly what happened to Alia. She's gone. Now it's just the Baron Harkonnen wearing her face. So, for Leto and Ghanima, every single second of their lives is a war. It's a constant battle inside their own minds just to stay themselves, to fight off these legions of ancestors who want to take control. This great power they inherited, it's a nonstop threat to their very souls. But, as if that internal war wasn't enough, Leto II, his own prescient vision starts to awaken. And what he sees is a problem so much bigger than a failing empire. He sees the end of everything. See, his father, Paul, saw branching futures, terrible paths he had to navigate around. But Leto sees something much more final. He sees that humanity on its current course is headed for a brick wall. Not a dark age, not a setback, but total, absolute extinction. The entire human species is trapped in a pattern that will eventually lead to its own complete annihilation. So he develops this absolutely insane, brutal, long-term plan he calls the Golden Path. The logic is just chilling. He sees the stagnation, he foresees the extinction, and he realizes the only way out is a radical, terrifying solution. He has to become a tyrant. He has to enforce a galactic peace for thousands of years, a peace so absolute and oppressive that when it finally breaks, humanity will have no choice but to scatter to the farthest corners of the universe, ensuring we can never, ever be trapped and destroyed again. This, of course, brings us to the absolutely shocking climax of the book. A plan that spans millennia needs a leader who can live for millennia. A 9-year-old boy won't cut it, so Leto has to become something else. He has to make a choice that he can never, ever take back. He actively goes out into the desert and finds sand trout, the larval stage of the giant sandworms. And he doesn't just touch them, he invites them to cover his entire body. They fuse with him, becoming a second skin, a living, symbiotic armor. This new form gives him incredible strength and a lifespan of thousands of years. But the cost is horrifying. He will slowly, over centuries, transform into a grotesque human sandworm hybrid, losing his human form forever. So what does this monstrous transformation get him? It gives him the power and, just as importantly, the time to seize the throne and begin one of the most bizarre and disturbing reigns in all of fiction, the long, lonely rule of the God Emperor. Just let that number sink in for a second. 3,500 years. That's longer than the time between the ancient Egyptians building the pyramids and us right now. He rules humanity with an absolute, unshakable iron fist for a length of time that is basically impossible for us to even comprehend, all to make sure the Golden Path works. And this right here is the central paradox of his entire reign. Every single terrible cost has a necessary reward. He gives up his human body to gain the immortality he needs to guide humanity. His absolute tyranny creates a forced galaxy-wide stability. The suffering he causes in the short term is the price for our long-term survival. And his own unimaginable, crushing loneliness is what ultimately buys humanity its freedom. And that's the key, isn't it? We see him and we think monster. We think tyrant. But the story forces us to consider that this horrifying transformation was maybe the single greatest act of self-sacrifice imaginable. He didn't do it for power. He did it because he saw it was the only way to save a species he loved, even knowing that species would hate and fear him for it. Because his ultimate goal was to be a lesson burned into our very DNA. He controlled humanity so tightly for so long that he created an instinctual, biological revulsion to being controlled. He wanted to make us so desperate for freedom that we would scatter so far and wide that no single person, not even him, could ever trap us again. Which leaves us with the big question, the one that sits at the heart of the entire Dune saga. Was he a hero or a monster? Can an act of supreme tyranny also be an act of supreme love? Is a sacrifice like that, is it ever justified, even if it really is the only path to survival? That, my friends, is what makes this story unforgettable.